your credible growth target for South Africa's economy? In what period do you think you would be able to reach that target? I'll start off with you, and everybody's going to answer the same question. Mr. Maimane, number one, what is your credible growth target for South Africa's economy? In what period do you think you would be able to reach that target? And what is the one key reform your party would implement tomorrow in order to get there? So the question is, what is your growth target for this country's economy? How long you think it would take you to get there? And what is the single reform you would implement to ensure that we actually get there?
No, thank you. Firstly, I think I genuinely think South Africa's economy is capable of growing at between 4 to 5%. I genuinely believe that. If we don't achieve that, we're going backwards because our population growth is growing at over 3%. So the reality is, if you don't achieve beyond 4, more and more people are entering poverty. Critical is, if you look at economies that are growing all over the world, and you look at the Asian tigers, let me pick that section. There are two things that are fundamental that they've had to do. One is the skilling question. It's why I keep fighting every day that we end this 30% hogwash of asking our young people to pass at 30%. It's setting themselves up for a future that does not exist. And then secondly, we've got to target. When I mentioned this question about rail and energy, the last time South Africa actually laid a track in this country, if you exclude the Gautrain, was in 1981. It tells you that rail infrastructure is falling behind. And the reason I say that is because were we to create, I'm just giving one practical project that we can all work towards, is to interact between what the network between Mpumalanga, Northwest, Gauteng. You build a high-speed network into that space. You do two things. You attract construction infrastructure, you increase manufacturing, you deal with the blockages of energy, water, etc. But more crucially, you integrate those provinces into the economy. So that's a critical project. So
how long would it take your party to get there? 4.5%.
I would argue this is at least a 4 to 5 year plan that we could get towards, because I don't think it's going to be in a year, but in 4 years we could do it.
Mr. Mashaba?
Well, I think, for us as a country, if we need to reverse the spiral of high unemployment, anything under 5%, it's not going to really help this
So what's
country.
your growth target? You see, Mr. Maimane did that. He didn't give us the figure, but he says 4.5 and 5 is not bad. What is your party's growth target?
I'm saying it's if this economy does not grow by 5%, we won't be able to address unemployment in this country. It can only get worse, as is indicated in terms of population growth. But more importantly, while we having our own population growth, we having our communities living rural areas coming into the cities because there are no longer opportunities in the rural areas. So one big mistake we've made, and you wanted a solution, an easy one that Action SA will provide, is to deal with this issue of illegal undocumented foreign nationals. So as long as we as a country, we are not prepared to face this particular matter, we need mass deportation of anyone who's in our country illegally and close our borders so that opportunities can be given to our people. Because this, what I would call criminals, because why I would really say they're criminals, because they came into our country legally. So anyone who breaks the law, to me, in my world, it's a criminal. So what they do, they bring in billions of goods on a daily basis. They are not registered with the revenue services. They are not employing our people. So you can imagine if we deport them as a matter of agency, how much employment we will create. So as long as a country, we want to be nice, then we must accept the consequences of
how
our
long would
niceness.
it take Action SA to get there? The period of growth. So you say the target is 5%. Your one measure is to deport all illegal or undocumented migrants in the country. How long would it take
Well,
to
I
reach
can
that
tell you,
period?
if we can have a government that can embark on mass deportation as a priority, in the first 5 years, you'll see this country growing at a minimum of 5%. Because
Okay.
this country has got a potential to actually grow more than 5%. 5%, as I'm saying, is a conservative number.
All
But
right.
as long as we are not really prepared to deal with the elephant in the room and fool ourselves,
All right,
then
sir.
we must be prepared to pay the consequences.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Zikalala.
Obvious, the target is to grow the economy. 5% should be the minimum target. Of that, 3.8% is targeted for African free continental trade, and that is proven. What then needs to be done is to focus on industries that we need to grow in the country. That then talk to supporting industrialization. Where are those? It is in our special economic zones. It is in our industrial parks that are closer to townships where we'll support small businesses. We're already connecting with Africa for a bigger market, and the work is being done. Number of people have participated, especially from the Black business community, have participated in various platforms that are opened for trade. So we must do more on industrialization than trade finished goods as the country. And we have been doing that. One sector that is falling is that of minerals, which we are now focusing, and I think there is a dedicated approach. There is a dedicated approach to support agriculture and connect that with Africa. So sector-based strategies are there, and our target is to ensure that we become an industrial hub of Africa. The network industries,
the
network
period of
industries.
time, the period of time to
Well,
get to 5% growth?
Let me be specific. The network industries, the logistics, you will see that in 3 years we will be done with improving network industries. We will have also in the next 5 years have addressed the issue of the speed train between Durban and Johannesburg, Johannesburg and Musina, as well as Mbombela. And I'm not talking about plans, but I'm talking about things that are already being started and implemented, and the government is doing work on that.
Thank you, Mr. Zikalala. Dr. Mufokeng?
So for the city of Johannesburg, the growth target by the city's own IDP projects for 2026-27 is an average growth rate of 2.5, which is not adequate for a city such as Johannesburg. And the tagline of Johannesburg is, a city that sees itself leading in Africa as well. So we need to consider that roughly 791 billion is what is the GDP roughly and intended to be reached by 2029. We still think that's inadequate. We do think though, however, there must be financial management that is much more honest and that the results are actually measurable. I think a lot of people are not investing in Johannesburg simply because of the corruption that I would be inheriting as your mayor in a few weeks. Structural transformation of ownership, land, expropriation without compensation, nationalization of state custodianship of strategic minerals, and mandated worker community equity stakes are at the core and the root to closing these often racially engendered ownership gaps 30 years into a democracy. We need
So, Dr.
reindustrialization.
Teleng, what is the target?
It's about between 5 and 8%.
5 and 8%.
But it's going to require a lot of negotiation and getting back all the sectors of society to see Johannesburg as a space of honesty and integrity, transparency and accountability. And
How long to get there?
we will give ourselves at least, 4 years. But because I will be elected again, right, for a second term, it's important to realize that the national sphere of government is in charge of many laws and policies. And those laws and policies must be translated in tangible outcomes for the city of
So
Johannesburg.
the single reform then that you would implement, the one single reform that could get you to between 5 and 8% in the next 4 years.
We need to rebuild reindustrialization and localization, which means rebuilding domestic manufacturing capacity, insourcing workers who are currently experiencing, in economic precarity. We need local beneficiation of minerals so that the raw products do not leave South Africa to return back as goods that we then just are consumers of. And the procurement rules for South Africa are very important because they
Okay.
do impact Black-owned production as well.
All right, thank you. Mr. Zungula?
5% minimum. The term anything which is between 4 and 5 years. Now, on the issue of the reform, our view is very clear on issues of state intervention. You can't let the transformation and growth of the economy be left to the hands of the market. You need the state to be intentional about growing the economy, transforming the economy, and creating jobs. Now, in the state, there is public procurement, in which our view as a party, any government contract that is below 10 million must be set aside for small businesses. That's the first thing. I once saw a tender that was won by Bidvest for R1 million in Polokwane municipality. That shows how big business actually has entrenched itself in the procurement space of government. So that's the first thing that needs to be dealt with, that the government must create a conducive space for small businesses, not only to enter, but also to thrive in terms of government procurement. The second issue is that if we can learn from Botswana, Botswana recently, in fact, for the longest time, was dependent on South Africa for agricultural produce. However, the government of Botswana was very clear to say all of the retailers, they must source 10% of their produce from farmers in Botswana. And it took less than 5 years to move from Botswana being dependent on South Africa for agricultural produce to Botswana being self-reliant. So the same thing could be done here, whereby if you go to Eastern Cape or you go to a certain municipality, the retailers there, there must be, it must be in law that they must source their produce from the local farmers. That is how you diversify the economy and you create jobs and you grow the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zungula. Mr. Msimang?
Thank you very much, Katie. I think the studies that show that there is never an economy that is able to then move forward if it's not coupled or married with infrastructure development that is taking place. We hear people saying, no, there must be more producers, there must be. Produce with what if you don't have reliable supply of electricity? Produce with what if you don't have a reliable supply of water in an area? If you don't have roads to be able to then move your goods? If you don't have roads and services that is able to then get people to places of work? And that's the first thing. So I think that we can look at beyond the 3% population growth. The kind of growth that we now need to then get to is between 5 and 6%. And you can do that, within five years. But it's going to mean that the certain unpopular decisions that will now need to then be made. We'll have to stop spending money on nice to haves and spend money on infrastructure development so that we can build infrastructure that is able to even reach the rural areas. We hear people saying, no, this economy is centralized around the big cities because that's where infrastructure is concentrated at. When we get infrastructure to go into rural areas, have more electricity supplies there, roads going there, water that is accessible there, you are able to then have much more production that is taking place there. All people are attracted to go and open up factories there. Then you can have production that is taking place. So we can then talk about broadening and decentralizing the economy by ensuring that you concentrate on infrastructure and infrastructure building. Right now, government spends less than 4%. Even at the municipal level, maintaining its infrastructure. We now need to then quadruple that in order for us to be able to attract investment. People go and invest where government is investing on infrastructure. That's where we need to then be focusing on.
Thank you, Mr. Msimang.